Smartphones were a revolutionary new technology that changed the world. In just a small number of years, they went from non-existent to in the pockets of virtually everybody. The appeal of the smartphone was that it was supposed to be a convenient and easy way to quickly communicate with people all over the planet. And it was. But somewhere along the way, it also became something else. It became a device that listens, observes, predicts, and tracks. This didn't happen because of some kind of glitch or a mistake. It happened by design because companies made a series of decisions that quietly turned your phone into one of the most powerful tracking devices ever created. This was all a deliberate business strategy to collect something that many companies value more than even money: data. And their pursuit of this data has reshaped life in the modern world without any of us even noticing. And if that doesn't make you paranoid, maybe it should. Because the truth is simple. Like it or not, your phone isn't tracking you by accident. It's tracking you because somebody decided it should be. For most people, the transition of your smartphone from a simple tool used for communication and entertainment to a surveillance system was mostly invisible. Early smartphones were overall pretty simple. You had the ability to call and text, check the internet, check the weather, and maybe a few other simple apps that were probably for listening to music or early phone games. Nothing about these devices had any reason to make you suspicious or feel like anything sinister was happening behind the scenes. But for the companies building these devices, things were changing. Once early smartphones were rolled out, executives and engineers in these companies began realizing the data inside the phone could become more valuable and profitable than the devices themselves. It wasn't the potential of hardware, apps, or features, but what they could observe from your behavior itself. What you clicked on, what caused you to click away from something, where you went, and what you scrolled past. While all of these individual metrics may seem useless at first, they are incredibly valuable for a company because all of these small signals combined create a larger profile of who you are, what you're interested in, the way you behave, and what you're likely to do next. And once companies realized this, they saw limitless potential for profitability. They no longer would have to guess how each person in the market was going to respond to new products or marketing strategies that were rolled out for the masses with little individuality involved. They would now be able to market products to individuals directly based on the profile of them they were able to gather through their data. So once companies understood this, the business model immediately shifted. The business model was no longer solely about selling devices. It was about collecting data. But this pivot didn't happen on a stage at a product launch or a press conference. It happened behind the scenes in corporate meetings. And it happened so quietly and subtly that nobody even noticed, which was exactly what they wanted. This was the beginning of a new surveillance-driven business model that over time would become more and more extreme. It was a model built on the idea that the more a company knew about you, the more valuable and more profitable you became. And from this moment on, your smartphone stopped being just a useful tool used for communication and entertainment. It began moving toward becoming a sensor specifically designed to exploit you. Once companies decided to shift to a business model centered around collecting data, the next move came quickly. Collect everything, even if users never explicitly asked for it. And this is where the race to collect your data truly began. Companies started tracking every possible behavior that they could. Not just where you went, but how you moved. Not just the things you clicked on, but what things you hovered over. And not just the things you searched for, but what you almost searched for. Your location, movements, daily routines, search habits, fears, and interests were all constantly recorded and collected. And while people did eventually start to notice this, companies always had the same simple justification for all of it. We need this data to improve the product and user experience. But behind the scenes, something else entirely was going on. Data was becoming the new competitive advantage that companies would have to utilize in order to succeed in the market. And companies like Google proved just how profitable this model could be. The more devices they powered, the more data they collected, and the stronger their advertising empire became. Whoever was able to collect the most data would be able to win the market. Because the more companies knew about you, the more they could predict your behaviors and influence you into buying their products through strategic and personalized marketing. At this point, your phone was no longer just a useful tool. It was a surveillance system designed to track you, observe you, and use that information to feed back into the system and monetize your behaviors. In this new economy, every small subconscious decision you would make would likely result in a product being dangled in your face because of even the tiniest of actions. And this was the moment a line was crossed. And it was crossed quietly and strategically without ever even getting your permission. But it was crossed nonetheless and resulted in an invasion of your privacy. When companies first made the decision to collect your data, it was done primarily through the use of apps. And these apps asked for permissions. All you had to do was go into your app settings and you could deny these apps the ability to track things such as your location, your microphone, and your contacts. This was a feature that was supposed to eliminate any fear users would have about companies collecting their data. And while we still have the ability to utilize these permissions, they don't mean as much as they used to. And the reason why is because as the value of data grew, companies decided to make their next move. Shift the tracking from being solely in apps to the phone's operating system itself. And once this shift occurred, your phone began using background location tracking even when no app needed it. And while permissions made it look like things were being turned off, the operating system still knew where you were. And if all of this wasn't enough, cross-app tracking began connecting your behavior from one app to another due to apps sharing data with the same third-party companies. And soon after, data broker companies began buying and reselling this data. And perhaps the most surprising part is that none of this was illegal. None of it required your permission, and none of it was announced to the public. By this point, phones were no longer just passively collecting your data. They were being specifically engineered to build a profile on you to accurately predict your next moves. Once companies decided to build tracking into the operating system itself, they still needed users to agree to app-level tracking. So they made one final decision that would lock us into a system of surveillance forever. They decided to make saying yes to data collection the default. While initially users were asked to opt into being tracked, they now would have to opt out. And opting out would be tricky and more difficult than the average user would be willing to put the effort into, as it was often hidden behind layers of menus. Anyone who has ever had to go through the pain of trying to cancel a subscription and having to dig through a company's website for 20 minutes in order to find the cancel button understands the pain of all of this all too well. And these were the same design tactics that were applied to your privacy settings. Dark patterns quietly became the new standard practice. These were buttons that made accept bright and bold while hiding the deny button in plain text. They were pop-ups that made tracking seem helpful and meant to optimize personalization. They were framed to make saying yes feel necessary, and like saying no would ruin the entire user experience. And once even one company started using these dark patterns, it immediately became the new standard for the entire industry. Because if one company was able to collect massive amounts of user data through these tactics, all of their competitors would have to do the same, or they would never be able to keep up. And once these new tactics became the standard, the surveillance business model was locked in and unstoppable. Not because users truly wanted it, or that it enhanced their experience, but because companies realized it was the easiest way to collect their data and to make a profit. So now we live in a world where every time we use our smartphone to scroll our favorite apps, or search for something interesting, we have to live with the fact that companies are always quietly lurking in the background, tracking our every movement so that they can find a way to make money off of our behaviors. And while we may all have been conditioned to find all of this normal by now, we didn't get here by accident. We got here because companies made the decision to start collecting our data and then slowly start removing our ability to say no to this by building surveillance features into operating systems themselves, and by utilizing dark patterns to make us feel like it was all a good thing and necessary for our own user experience. But in hindsight, it feels like all of this was inevitable, because the truth is simple. The more these companies know about you, the more money they can make off of you. And now we find ourselves in a situation where we exist in a system that often understands us better than we understand ourselves. A system that knows our next moves before we do, and what it can trigger in our minds to make us purchase a product. But because all of this is so profitable, the surveillance business model isn't going anywhere. If anything, it's only going to become far more intrusive. But how intrusive will it all truly get, and how many more lines will companies be willing to cross in order to track our behaviors? If this pattern continues, we could eventually be living in a dystopian nightmare where privacy no longer exists at all, if we aren't there already. So the question we're left with is, how far are we going to let this business model go? Because systems this profitable never just go away, they only continue to evolve. This was the Visionary Analyst. If you enjoyed this video, Please subscribe, drop a like on the video, and follow my social media accounts linked in the description below. And don't miss the next video, where we'll be covering the business decisions that led to the creation of the gig economy.